just wanted to say that the physical release of my webcomic Unfamiliar is up for pre-order right now. Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne. And today I want to talk about some things that can make people care about your character or your OC. A lot of people love making OCs, but sometimes I see people who have trouble actually fully fleshing out their character, but not going too far where you're getting lost in details. So I just want to talk about some of the things that help me. The first thing I'd like to suggest is giving them more verbs. Now, what does that actually mean? So whether you're writing your character into a book or whether you're drawing them or just making an OC, a lot of the times people kind of focus on one aspect of their character. Sometimes it's their job, let's say that there's a knight or they work at an office or something. Sometimes people don't go much farther than that. So the key thing that you want to think about is making sure to give them more verbs, which basically just means other things that they like to do. This can be really helpful when you don't really know how you want to draw them. You just feel like you want to draw them. If you know their hobbies and stuff, it can be a lot easier to figure out their pose and the things you want to draw them with. What sort of accessories and things that they are attracted to can be sort of controlled by what they like to do. So giving them things that they like to do other than just their main thing, whatever their main job is, can really make them feel more fleshed out. Depending on how realistically you draw, it can also actually change things about them. So let's say that they're a painter, you might find little bits of paint under their fingernails or on their hands or splattered on one part of their clothes, and that can add a lot to a character who otherwise might be sort of cliched or feel kind of blank. I think a good rule of thumb is to give them 2 to 3 hobbies outside of their job, and that will make them feel more like a real person. The next thing you want to give your character to make them feel more fleshed out and more real is to give them a history. Now, this doesn't mean you have to find lineages of their family that go back, a million generations, but you should always remember that before your character was the age that they are now, they were a teenager and a child and a baby. And while you don't have to know every detail of everything that happened to them, it can be really helpful while you're designing them to think about how they experienced those different ages and how that would affect them to this day. Usually they'll be less affected by things that are farther away, like stuff that's when they were a baby, and more affected to their closer ages, but that can kind of change depending on who they are. So for example, I drew this 21-year-old first. She seems very bland and basic, but then I thought maybe she was sort of goth or emo or a scene kid when she was 16, and maybe when she was 12 she was a huge science nerd and she loved dinosaurs and had braces, and maybe when she was a little baby she really used her pacifier a lot and had sort of downy fluffy hair, like some babies have. And then when I redrew the 21-year-old with all of these factors in mind, she has straight teeth because of her braces. She has a slightly more exaggerated wing on her eye because she used to be an emo kid. And she's wearing dinosaur earrings because her interest in dinosaurs when she was 12, as well as the little downy bits of hair that kind of fly off of her main hairstyle. That's just latent sort of genetics from when she was a baby and had curly hair. So as you can see, it makes it really easy to add things to them that make them feel really specific and like that they had a past. Obviously things like scars and injuries and major things like that can also really help build out their story, but you don't want to go too hard on that because if they're covered in scars, that's going to take over their story. So it's really up to you how much you want their history to sort of control their present appearance. But it's definitely something that I like to do when I'm figuring out who my characters are. The next thing you want to give your characters is imperfections. I kind of brought that up with scars, but really imperfections can be even more subtle things like chipped nail polish and imperfect hairstyles. Now, if you're creating a character who by their very nature is extremely meticulous, or perhaps they've been to boot camp or some other kind of private school, things that sort of force you to be as perfect as you can be, even in those cases you should still probably draw imperfections on your characters just because everybody is human and there's wind and things that you can't control. But basically what I'm saying is don't draw your characters with perfect hair, perfect clothes, everything sitting exactly the way it should, unless that is who they are, unless they're someone who constantly checks themselves and makes sure that they're looking perfect and, knows how to do their hair, knows how to do their nails, knows how to wear clothes perfectly without them wrinkling or anything like that. Otherwise, it really, really helps make that character feel more real and interesting and, again, specific. That's something that I come back to a lot because with original characters, the last thing you want them to feel is generic. So anything that makes them feel like them, something that is recognizable to them, that can really be helpful. So my two examples here, we have like sort of the pristine version where everything is just exactly as it should be, and then on the other side I sort of loaded her up with imperfections. Now if you go this hard, they start to look like they've been up all night. So you don't have to do all of them at once. It kind of depends on who your character is and what stage of life they're at and how they're doing. But things like eye bags, moles, freckles, chipped nail polish, clothes that aren't sitting perfectly right, and hair coming out of their ponytails and stuff, that can really make them feel more real and more interesting. So definitely experiment with that. The next thing you want to think about is what they actually like and dislike. Now, this is an obvious thing, and a lot of people when they first get into drawing their OCs do think about this. In fact, I used to be in the habit of listing like my character's favorite and least favorite everything, like literally down to like their favorite type of tea, their favorite like ice cream flavor, you know, really granular stuff. I actually recommend not going too hard in that direction. You can really get caught up in details that would never be relevant, but I do think it's important to know the basics, and sometimes if a character is really associated with a certain item, you can even use that in place of them, and you know, like if a character is always eating peaches, for example, if you see a peach in a scene where that character is not there, it will make you think of them, and you can do sort of interesting things with that. So giving them like a signature favorite food, a pattern that they like to wear, that can be really helpful if you feel like you don't know how to dress them in different scenarios. If they love like houndstooth or plaid or something, then you always know you can throw in a little bit of that to make an outfit feel like them, no matter what the season or what kind of outfit it is. Also knowing just what sort of media they gravitate towards. You don't have to know like their favorite author and everything unless they're a real bookworm, but knowing what they tend to like can help you sort of like understand what their expectations would be. Like if someone loves romance novels, they're going to act differently in a relationship than somebody who doesn't, you know, like they might subconsciously be affected by those things. So it can help build out their personality, and again, you can kind of find things that they're so associated with that it reminds the reader or whatever of that character, and that can be really helpful. Now, in a lot of my tutorial or advice style videos, I don't actually put my advice to the test, so now I'm going to actually do that just so that it will be a little more helpful. I'm making this little guide where I'm going to put in information about a character that I have not designed and that I don't really know anything about yet. Then I'll draw them based on my answers. If you want, you can answer the questions along with me and design your own character while you're watching the video. It could be kind of fun. Alright, I have no idea what we should do for the job. I'm just going to try to think of something random. Let's say that our character is a student and studying insects. So I guess they're studying, what is that? I want to say ichthyologist, but I believe that's a study of fish. I'll look it up. It's on the screen now. That's what it is. For hobbies, let's do one active thing and one passive thing. Let's say that they like to do ballet. And then for the non-active activity, let's say that they like to play video games. So for the history, I'm gonna say that as a baby, this character fell and got a scar on their head, so bonked head. As a kid, this is probably where they learned their love of bugs. And then as a teen, let's say they went to a private school, strict upbringing. I don't have enough space. I now kind of have a picture of like who they are. So imperfections, let's do that eyebrow scar from when they were a baby. They probably don't have imperfections with their hair because ballerinas always have these perfect buns, so it's not going to be their hair. And I feel like parents who put their kids in ballet and private school usually get them braces really early, so it's probably not a tooth thing either. I'm going to give them a noticeable birthmark. And last but not least, let's think about their faves. They're currently in college. I'm gonna say that they love espresso because they're also a gamer. Gamer college student, private school. Makes me think that they probably weren't allowed to drink a lot of coffee when they were in their home, but now they're really getting it into their system. The next one I want to do is their like pattern that they like. Now, either they did or they didn't like their school uniform. Let's say that they liked their school uniform, which means that they like plaid. And then for the last thing, This could be a rebellion thing. Again, they're off to college for their first time, so I'm thinking that they're probably experimenting with things they weren't allowed to watch. So let's say horror movies. And also they're not overly squeamish because of the bug thing, so now I'm going to try to design the character, keeping in mind and leaving clues for every single factor that I've determined about her. First of all, I wanted to think about her stance and her posture. That was mainly controlled by her ballet hobby. Dancers tend to stand a little differently than normal people. They're a little more graceful, and particularly with ballerinas, I feel like drawing them with their toes pointed farther apart than a regular person kind of gives you that dancer vibe a little bit more, just because they're so flexible that standing that way is not difficult for them. I also kept her ballerina past in her hair. I gave her 2 low buns so it doesn't look like she's off to dance practice, but I made sure that they're both perfectly round with no flyaways, which makes me think of ballet all the time, or any other, like, you know, gymnastics, that kind of thing. And I did a lot of clue leaving in her clothes for her student role. I mean, the coffee and the tote bag, I feel like lean into that, but specifically with her interest in bugs, I gave her those novelty earrings. I just love that. I mean, it's kind of a cheap way to incorporate your character's interests, and it's not obviously going to work for everyone, but I felt like with her quirky design, it actually fit in just fine. I also made sure that her socks were over the top of her tights. This is something that people who hike a lot often do. They like tuck their pants or their tights into their socks so that if they walk past an area with like ticks, the ticks can't get to their skin. And I also gave her practical shoes, so if for school she needs to go like out into the field to find bugs, she's going to be able to walk through areas like that without any trouble. I also get some more clues about her hobbies, her interest in horror movies and gaming. I put a little like Dead by Daylight logo on her shirt. I could have picked any horror game. I just picked that one because there's characters that are actually from horror movies in the game, so I felt like it leaned more into her interest in horror movies. And I put an espresso in her hand. That one's just very basic and obvious. She likes espresso, so she has one. For her little scar in her eyebrow, it's not very obvious. I felt like she maybe wasn't someone who would want to show it off necessarily, so you can just barely see it under her heavy bangs. And I almost forgot to put her birthmark on, but it is going to show up on her upper arm. That was another thing that I was glad I put in there. It just makes her look a little bit more like a specific person. Again, I keep coming back to that whole concept. For her color palette, I kept it relatively earthy. The only area where there's like a real pop of color is on her cap sleeves, where I'm showing off her interest in plaid. I also have a very subtle taupe plaid on her skirt, and the skirt is on her waist instead of her hips because she's a ballerina, and because of her private school, she's used to wearing skirts up at the waist. Honestly, I'm really happy with how she turned out, but even more than how she turned out, it's like the way that it was so easy to figure things out for her because I knew so much about her. I highly recommend that you guys try this and just see how designing a character, knowing a lot about them first, can really change the way that you make choices for them. Thank you so much for watching till the end of the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you to my wonderful patrons, including Liv, Salty Jackrabbit, Fukuro Ko, Moose Milk, Raven's Crow, Saucelot, Harold Bird, Jabber Dabber Doo, Gender Was Stolen, for Spookable. It's Jamal! Kay, Rodrigo, Moo Milk, Kadaria, Deadly Nightshade Art, Astral Fox Art, Lily Allure, The Expressive Poker Face, Tsubaki, Michael Lavally, Cutie Pie, Rune Raincrow, Rainwater Pearls, Ice Cream Pal, Cola, JJ Jade, and of course, Libla Blibla.